He left his wife, sold his future, and drove halfway across the country for a woman he thought was 22, only to fall into a trap run by a 49-year-old stranger, 9 children, and a criminal operation he never saw coming. His dream escape turned into a nightmare that nearly cost him everything. Mark Halston, a middle-aged black man living in the quiet town of Pine Ridge, carried a life that looked stable from the outside but felt hollow on the inside. His days blended together through routine work, quiet dinners, and long evenings spent in a home that no longer felt warm. Over the years, emotional distance grew between him and his wife, creating a loneliness he never admitted to anyone. He felt unseen, fading into the background of a life he once believed would bring him comfort. As that emptiness grew heavier, he turned to his phone at night, searching for distraction and validation he no longer received in his marriage. Scrolling through different profiles became a habit, then an escape, and eventually an addiction. He wanted to feel noticed again, wanted someone to remind him that he still mattered. During one of these late-night searches, he discovered a profile belonging to a young black woman who called herself Lacey. Her images radiated youth and confidence: bright lipstick, stylish curls, club lights, palm trees, and sunsets. Every photo seemed full of life, everything Mark felt he had lost. Her captions displayed energy and freedom that pulled him in instantly. The attention she gave him created a rush he hadn't felt in years. She asked about his day, complimented his appearance, and made him believe he was interesting again. He grew protective over his secret connection, hiding notifications, deleting messages, and spending hours crafting responses. The more he interacted with her, the more he drifted from his reality. Without realizing it, Mark started building a second life in his mind, one where he felt wanted, admired, and young again. It became the only life he wished to live, even before everything began to unravel. Mark's growing attachment to Lacey quickly reshaped the way he viewed everything around him. His home felt smaller, the walls heavier, and every routine moment with his wife reminded him of the excitement he believed he had found elsewhere. What once felt familiar now seemed suffocating. He convinced himself he had wasted years living a life that no longer belonged to him. The contrast between his quiet marriage and the youthful energy Lacey presented made his dissatisfaction feel urgent. He began imagining a future without the responsibilities and expectations that had shaped his adult life. The divorce decision came faster than anyone expected. Mark filed the paperwork without hesitation, driven by a mix of impulse and fantasy. His wife was stunned, but Mark avoided every conversation, refusing to reflect on the sudden change. He believed staying would only trap him further. His mind was dominated by thoughts of Texas, warm weather, new opportunities, and the promise of someone who made him feel alive again. He ignored every warning from friends who sensed something was wrong. Their concern felt like interference rather than care. Mark packed his belongings in a rush, filling suitcases with clothes he thought would fit his new beginning. He left behind photos, keepsakes, and years of shared memories without a second thought. He told coworkers he needed a fresh start, claiming he was moving to rebuild his life, though he hid the real reason. His excitement for Lacey overshadowed every logical concern. He believed he was stepping into a future filled with youth, beauty, and freedom. He never questioned whether the life he imagined was real, because he needed it to be true more than he needed the truth itself. Mark began his long drive to Texas with the same confidence he once carried in his youth, convinced he was heading toward a brighter chapter of his life. The open road felt symbolic, stretching endlessly before him like an invitation to escape everything he believed was holding him back. As he drove through small towns and long rural stretches, he imagined Lacey waiting for him with the same warmth she showed online. He pictured a young black woman with glowing skin, perfect curls, and a lively smile, someone who seemed to embody the energy and freedom he craved. The farther he traveled, the more he convinced himself that he was making the right choice. He replayed her messages in his mind, focusing on the compliments and the attention that had captivated him so quickly. Every mile created distance not only from Pine Ridge but also from the doubts that occasionally surfaced. Whenever a small inconsistency in her stories came to mind, he pushed it aside. He reminded himself that people could seem different online, and he called it a harmless exaggeration rather than a warning. The journey became its own kind of high. The hum of the tires, the shifting landscapes, and the sunlight warming the windshield made him feel alive again. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. He imagined a fresh identity in Texas, one where he was admired, appreciated, and not weighed down by the past. He completely trusted the version of Lacey he had built in his head, believing she represented everything missing in his life. He never considered that he might be driving straight toward danger, blinded by the fantasy he refused to question. Mark arrived at the address Lacey had given him with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. He had imagined a lively apartment or a modern townhouse, something that matched the youthful lifestyle she portrayed online. Instead, he found a neglected house sitting at the end of a quiet street, its paint faded and its yard overgrown. The sight unsettled him immediately. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself she might be staying with family or going through a rough patch, but uneasiness crept into his thoughts as he approached the door. When it opened, the shock hit him like a physical blow. Standing in the doorway was not the 22-year-old he had convinced himself he knew, but an older black woman, closer to 50, with tired eyes and deep lines that revealed years of exhaustion. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her clothes worn, and her expression strangely calm, as if she had been expecting his confusion. Behind her, the noise of children filled the house. He counted 9 in total, some toddlers, some older, all moving in chaotic patterns around the cluttered living room. Mark's breath caught as the truth settled in. The glamorous photos, the confidence, the youthful charm, none of it belonged to the woman standing before him. The person he had been speaking to never existed. Lacey's posture remained steady, showing no hint of embarrassment or regret. She stepped aside, motioning for him to enter, and the door closed softly behind him. Inside, the air felt heavy, dense with noise, clutter, and a sense of something hidden beneath the surface. Mark realized he had stepped into a situation far more complicated and dangerous than simple deception. Mark stepped into the crowded living room, feeling the air grow heavier with every second. Toys, clothing, and half-finished meals covered nearly every surface, forming a landscape of clutter that made movement difficult. Lacey navigated the mess with practiced ease, signaling that this chaos was normal for her. The 9 children moved around him with quiet curiosity, their eyes lingering on him longer than he expected. Some watched openly while others peeked from behind furniture, studying him as if he were an unfamiliar object placed in their territory. Mark tried to calm himself, but the tension inside him kept building. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, in a way he couldn't yet define. The house seemed too organized beneath the surface mess, as if every misplaced item had a purpose he didn't understand. While he was trying to orient himself, he saw one of the older children lift his phone from his jacket pocket with quick, practiced hands. By the time Mark registered what had happened, the phone was already gone, disappearing somewhere into the maze of rooms. As he turned toward the door, he heard the unmistakable click of a lock sliding into place behind him. The casual way it happened made his stomach tighten. Lacey continued moving through the room as if nothing unusual had occurred, glancing at him briefly with a look that carried no emotion. The children resumed their activities, though several kept watchful eyes fixed on him. Mark sensed the walls closing in. He realized he had stepped into a situation crafted with intention, not accident. The trap had begun tightening, and escape already felt dangerously out of reach. Mark's sense of unease grew as the hours passed, and soon the truth began revealing itself in disturbing fragments. The clutter he first noticed was not the mess of an overwhelmed household but the organized chaos of a long-running operation. Scattered across shelves and tables were prepaid phones, stacks of mail addressed to different names, and folders filled with papers that didn't match the woman who had greeted him at the door. The children moved with surprising coordination, drifting from room to room with practiced awareness, their actions too deliberate for their young ages. Mark realized he had stepped into something far more calculated than simple deception. Lacey was not a woman seeking companionship but a skilled manipulator operating within a larger criminal network. Her online identity was only one of many personas she used to lure vulnerable men. By preying on loneliness, she collected victims who were willing to travel long distances, making them easier to isolate once they arrived. The glamorous photographs she sent had been stolen from unsuspecting young black women across social media platforms, carefully chosen to appeal to men like Mark. Every part of the house played a role in the scheme. Phones were used for contact, notebooks for tracking victims, and children for monitoring newcomers. They were trained to watch reactions, block exits, and gather information. Mark noticed hidden cameras tucked between books and toys, their tiny lenses aimed directly at him. He felt a chilling awareness settle over him as he finally understood the scale of the situation. He hadn't been chosen by accident. He had been profiled, studied, and targeted. The fantasy he chased had led him into a world built on scams, intimidation, and control, and he was now trapped at the center of it. Mark spent the first night in the house pretending to rest, though sleep never came. Every sound echoed louder in the darkness, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of footsteps, the soft murmurs of children moving through the hallway. He waited for the moment when the house would fully settle into silence, hoping to slip away unnoticed. When the lights finally dimmed and the children began drifting off, he quietly rose and tested the nearest window. His heart sank when he felt resistance, thick nails held it firmly shut. He moved to another, only to find metal brackets screwed into the frame. Determined not to panic, he crept toward the back door. The faint moonlight revealed metal bars welded across it from the inside, reinforcing it with a level of intention that made his skin crawl. The entire property had been modified to prevent escape. He checked the side door next, but a heavy padlock hung from it, untouched for so long it was rusting around the edges. Every exit was sealed in a way that suggested victims before him had attempted the same thing. Mark backed into a shadowed corner, trying to steady his breathing. He realized his phone had been taken not simply to isolate him but to eliminate any chance of calling for help. No one knew where he was, and no one would think to search this neighborhood on the outskirts of Texas. The children sleeping across the floors created an unintentional barrier, making each step risky. One wrong move and the entire house could wake. The situation felt like a maze designed to trap him in confusion and fear. The more he searched, the clearer it became, he was not meant to leave, not without a plan far more meticulous than desperation. Mark spent the following days observing every movement in the house, searching for anything that resembled an opportunity. During this time, he noticed one of the older boys behaving differently from the rest. The teenager, quiet and withdrawn, often lingered near doorways or hall corners, keeping his distance from the constant activity around him. Unlike the others, he did not participate in gathering phones or monitoring Mark's movements. His eyes held a mixture of fear and reluctance, suggesting he had grown tired of the environment he lived in. Mark began paying closer attention to the boy's patterns. The teen avoided Lacey's gaze, stepped away whenever discussions turned tense, and seemed burdened by a responsibility he didn't want. When Mark walked through the hallway one afternoon, the boy briefly locked eyes with him, sending a silent message that felt intentional. Later that evening, when the rest of the household became absorbed in organizing piles of documents and prepaid phones, the boy slipped close enough to Mark to leave something tucked behind a stack of blankets. When Mark retrieved it, he found a small, folded piece of paper marked with faint lines. It took him a moment to realize it was a rough map of the property. A path was drawn from the hallway to an old storage shed outside, then to a narrow gap in the backyard fence where wooden boards had rotted. The map showed the only exit not sealed or reinforced. The boy never looked back at him, but the message was clear. Someone inside the house wanted him gone. For the first time since arriving, Mark felt a fragile thread of hope forming, one that depended on timing, silence, and absolute precision. Before dawn, Mark rose silently, guided only by the faint blue haze leaking through the curtains. The house was still, its usual layers of noise reduced to soft breathing and the occasional shift of a sleeping child. Every movement had to be deliberate. He stepped carefully through the hallway, placing each foot on spots he had memorized as the least likely to creak. The map the teenager had given him replayed in his mind like a whispered instruction. Any mistake could alert the entire household and end his chance of escape. He reached the back of the house where the air felt colder. The door to the yard opened into a narrow walkway, but the reinforced bars kept him from simply stepping out. Remembering the map, he turned toward the small window beside the washer. Its frame was loose, not sealed like the others. With slow, steady pressure, he pushed upward until it finally slid open enough for him to squeeze through. The movement scraped his skin, but he forced himself not to make a sound. Outside, the grass felt damp beneath his shoes. The storage shed loomed in the darkness, its wooden panels worn and leaning. Inside, clutter blocked most of the path: broken tools, rusted bicycles, boxes bursting with old clothing. He maneuvered through quietly, pushing objects aside with controlled motions. A soft thud echoed behind him, but he didn't stop. When he emerged from the shed, he saw the gap in the fence just as the map described. The boards had rotted, leaving enough space for him to slip through. As he squeezed into the opening, faint movement sounded from inside the house. Someone was awake. Mark didn't look back. He pushed through the fence, stepped onto a neighboring property, and began running, determined not to stop until he reached safety. Mark reached a nearby gas station just as the sun began to rise, his clothes torn and his body trembling with exhaustion. The early morning workers immediately noticed his distress and guided him inside, offering a safe space while they contacted law enforcement. For the first time since arriving in Texas, he felt a sense of protection. The fear that had gripped him for days slowly eased as he watched police vehicles approach, their lights cutting through the quiet morning. When officers questioned him, Mark described everything he had witnessed: the barred exits, the stolen phones, the forged identities, and the organized movement of the children throughout the house. Within hours, a coordinated raid was launched. Police entered the residence with caution, navigating the same maze of clutter and secrecy Mark had been trapped in. They uncovered folders filled with stolen personal information, prepaid phones linked to numerous online scams, and evidence of victims from several states. The children were escorted out gently, showing signs of long-term exposure to manipulation and fear. Lacey and her accomplices were taken into custody, their operation finally exposed after years of hiding behind digital deception. Mark returned to Pine Ridge carrying the emotional weight of the ordeal. His reputation had been shaken, and his personal life lay scattered in the aftermath of choices fueled by loneliness and fantasy. Yet he remained grateful to have survived a situation that could have ended much differently. Over time, his story became a cautionary lesson shared among community groups and online safety programs. It reminded people of the dangers hidden behind carefully crafted profiles and the vulnerability created by emotional desperation. Mark's experience stood as a stark warning that not every promise of escape leads to freedom. Sometimes, it leads into a trap waiting for someone just desperate enough to believe in it.